So welcome to Core Volunteer Training, which is a weekly webinar program of the Citizens Climate Lobby that provides CCL supporters, especially new or newer volunteers, with access to in-depth training opportunities on topics relating to climate change and effective climate advocacy. So tonight's focus is on handling difficulties in lobby meetings. I'm your host, Tamara Staten. I am CCL's Education and Resilience Coordinator as one of my roles, and this webinar is part of CCL's Working with Congress training series in advance of our online June conference, which is happening this Saturday and Sunday, as well as our lobby days, which are happening next week and beyond, I should say. So in tonight's webinar, we're going to demonstrate how to navigate some particularly difficult or tricky situations. We're really happy that you're here with us. Let me introduce ourselves. Usually I'm introducing a different speaker, but I am one of the speaker in the lineups this evening. In the lineup, Tony Cerna drives organization-wide strategic thinking for Citizens Climate Education and Citizens Climate Lobby. He supports our long-range planning as our CCL strategy director, and he helped to clarify organizational priorities and maximize our effectiveness at achieving them. So he also helps to coordinate immediate efforts to achieve strategic goals and promote synergies across departments and providing accountability for strategic goals. When he's not working on climate, you might find him playing ultimate frisbee or hiking in the beautiful hills around Oakland, California. I hope it's okay that I shared that, Tony. I'm Tamara Staten, as I mentioned, rhymes with camera and Satan, but don't tell my in-laws I'm telling you that. I founded my local Citizens Climate Lobby chapter in Portland, Oregon in 2012, and 2 years later stepped in as the regional coordinator of the Greater Pacific Northwest. And I support leaders and expansion efforts in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Alaska, Hawaii, and 3 Pacific Island territories. If anybody here is from the Greater Pacific Northwest, give us a shout out in the chat. Would love to know that you're here. Not to say that I don't love you all. I'm just, it's my region. So what can I say? In March 2020, I accepted a new position as Education and Resilience Coordinator, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to integrate my background in education, like I said, middle and high school teaching, with the climate work that I have come to love. And when I'm not climateering, you might find me in the beautiful wilds around rivers or lakes, as far away from my cell phone as I can get. So curveballs and objections can really stress us out in meetings that we're in, but also really potentially derail conversations. So equipping yourselves with the skills to overcome these scenarios will lead to more informed discussions about the benefits of our policy, and also empower legislators and others to become partners in passing the climate solutions that we need. So in this lesson tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to review responding with engagement to hard conversations that you might have in your meetings. Tony and I are going to demonstrate some bad, good, and better responses for each of these initial scenes to help give a window in, and keeping in mind that there's not just one better response. There are multiple better responses, but we're just going to share a couple of them with you. So we'll do our best to keep it interesting and engaging for you, asking your input throughout the evening. We'll share also a process for overcoming objections, and then we'll dive into how to handle difficult situations and questions before we point you to a key resource and provide some time to ask some questions throughout the evening. So let's get started with demonstrating how to respond to some common objections that you might encounter. The important thing, really, before we dive in to take away from this exercise isn't the content so much, but the process. So when you're first presented with an objection or concern, our natural inclination is to come back with a fact or tell someone why they're wrong. We're sort of wired for it as humans in a sense. So we have to untrain ourselves. So research, however, shows us that a better way to engage in a way that the other person is actually going to listen to us is to first connect on shared values. And usually that is really going to help them be more receptive to what we want to share with them. So let's explore each of the 5 following areas that can help you in your meetings to improve these conversations. So the first thing at the top is to assume positive intent. More often than not, a person's objections are genuine. Their concerns are real, and it's more likely that we are biased to blame someone as wrong or disingenuous or even less intelligent for having a belief that is contrary to what we believe. So to counteract this blame bias that we have, we want to practice assuming positive intent on the part of the other person. When we do this, we not only change the context of the relationship, but also create the conditions within which we can develop a productive relationship with our members of Congress and staff. And that's one of our values as CCLers, is relationship. So the next thing is to ask questions. In order to determine what's the underlying value behind a statement, we ask questions to draw out more information from the person that we're talking with. So once this member of Congress or the staffer has finished sharing their thoughts, they're going to be much more willing to listen to what we have to say. The third step in the process is to listen, and then to listen some more, and then to listen a bit more after that. People are much more likely to be open to what you have to say once they feel they have been listened to. You can sort of help them, I should say, feel heard by asking questions to make sure that you understand their concerns properly. And you can restate their question or comment so that you and they are sure that you understand it. The fourth step in this process is to find common ground. We want to establish common ground by sharing their concern and connecting ourselves to that value. And then we can articulate places of agreement with their values and concerns whenever possible. And we can use those to reframe the conversation. Like, it sounds to me like you want an effective solution. Is that right? And whenever possible, we try to resonate or agree with their values. We can't always do that, but when it works, then it really helps our brains tune into this other person when we say, I agree. And effectiveness is very important to me as well, right? There's something that happens in our brain when we hear no. It's a wiring thing. So we want to give as many yeses or as many that makes sense to me as we can to this other person to really support the relationship. And then step number 5 is to ask for permission to proceed. When someone gives you permission to proceed, they are ready to hear what you have to say. And in all reality, when we say, would you like to hear more about what I'm saying? Most people, even if they don't want to hear it, they're going to say yes. And there's something about that yes. There's something about them feeling respected because you asked for their permission that just makes space in the conversation. So do these process suggestions always work? No, they don't. Of course not, right? There's no guarantees in life, but we want to do our best and not lose our mind when it doesn't. So remember, if you remember nothing else from this whole slide, tell me more. Okay, that's all you got to remember. Tell me more. Super powerful conversational skill. Super, super great tool. All right, Tony, it's all you now.
Okay, thanks, Tamara. So right now, we have a basic framework in mind to ground the rest of our discussion. Let's put this into practice with a few scenarios with your member of Congress or their staff. So we'll practice some bad, good, and better responses to some common objections. So you'll have an idea of what you might say and do when you run into these situations. So the examples we're going to use are overcoming the quote unquote China and India objection, and objections around cost increases, and working across the aisle. So each of these topics has the potential to derail your meeting. Some of these are more likely to come from conservative, some are more likely to come from liberal offices, some might be heard in both. Hopefully after Tamara and I demonstrate a bad, good, and better response to each of these common problems, you'll have an idea of what you might say and do when you run into these situations. And remember, stay focused and respond to what they say, not what you think they need to hear. And we're going to take turns being the member of Congress or a staffer, and which one of us is the CCL volunteer, and then we'll debrief each section. And in this first one, I think I'm the staffer who raises a concern regarding China and India and we're assuming it's a conservative office. And so we'll start with the bad response.
A common misperception is that it doesn't really matter what the US does on climate because China and India aren't making any changes. So as we've highlighted, it can be really tempting to ignore the concern that's been expressed and to dive right into proving your point and telling the other person that they're wrong. If a staffer expresses the following.
Well, it doesn't matter what we're doing in the US because China and India are burning so much coal.
then attempting but less than optimal response might sound something like this. Yeah, well, a lot of Republicans fail to acknowledge the facts about what China is doing to address climate change.
Ooh.
So as you can imagine, such a response is likely to put the staffer on the defensive, and any chance at relationship building has just gotten much harder. Instead, you might go for a response that acknowledges the staffer's concern and then gently pivots to a few benefits about the bill while still integrating their concern. And such a response might sound like this. China and India are important. The good thing about our policy proposal is that no matter what they do or don't do, we'll have more jobs, increase our competitiveness, and the air and water in our district will be cleaner. So once you've taken the opportunity to validate their concern and perhaps point out a few bill benefits, then you might add an open-ended question. That might sound like this. That's a valid concern. Would you tell me more about why that matters to you? When you respond like this, it opens the possibility of further, deeper conversation that not only educates, but builds relationships. And as a reminder, open-ended questions, I'm going to ask you this question. What do open-ended questions start with? I will give you a clue. Most of them start with W. All right, so let's see. Chat interactivity options, just to keep you alive, awake, and enthusiastic here. What do open-ended questions, what words can they start with? Drum roll in the chat, please. Yes, there it is. Why, where, what, how, exactly. Perfect. Generally, we try to avoid why questions. Why questions tend to be put people on the defensive, but yes, you guys nailed it. So, all right, Tony is going to play the staffer for us again, and this is how a conversation might continue about China and India.
Well, sure. So, well, we see it this way. If the US is the only country eliminating coal jobs and coal as a source of energy, then China and India are free riding at our expense, and we can't stop global warming by ourselves.
So what I'm hearing you say is that if there was a way to bring China and India along, it would be much better and easier for this office, I should say, to support climate action. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, yes, but there are a lot of other issues we'd have to overcome as well.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, Tony. So getting back to the China and India concern, I had that same concern, and then I heard about how Reagan used a border adjustment to bring other countries along when combating the hole in the ozone layer. Would you like to hear more about what Reagan did to eliminate the free riders?
Okay.
So, Tony.
Yeah. So what are some things that you might notice in this example? Notice how the bad response didn't assume the staffer's positive intent. It went straight to, well, you're not doing your part. Notice how the better response started with acknowledgement of the staffer's statement and was followed by a question. Well, you like those questions. And both the bad and the good responses told the staffer what we wanted them to hear. It's only after we asked clarifying questions and listened were we able to respond to the value underlying the staffer's concern, which in this case was free riding. And if in doubt on any issue, the tell me more can be relied upon to continue to find that underlying issue or value. And also notice how with the better response, you can pivot back to your purpose and ask for permission to proceed.
So Tony, you're going to talk now about the cost increase, about the next concern,
Sure.
About the cost increase.
Sure. So here's another example of this process. In your interactions with some member of Congress offices, it's possible that you'll hear concerns that low-income households will suffer due to a carbon fee and dividend policy. There's a common concern that low-income communities will be left behind, and in some cases, a strong desire to correct for current and past injustices. So what do you think a staffer might be concerned about in terms of low-income communities will be left behind? Put your ideas in the chat. Where I live in California, in my district, the main concern is air pollution from local ports, refineries, freeways, but it might be different in your region. So maybe just give some examples of like what might, when they say low-income communities will be left behind, what might their concerns be? So it could be air pollution from factories. I see that. Resources. Yeah, and so in some places, you might get questions around affording cost increases. Some people, really struggle to cost of goods that communities can't afford, job loss in fossil fuel industry, cost increases becoming prohibitive. Some places it's about making sure there's going to be investments or jobs. So it can be tempting to ignore those concerns and just jump straight into sharing the financial facts about the bill or the need for bold action. And that might sound something like this. Tamara?
Well, we need effective action which drastically cuts carbon emissions within 10 years. And with this policy, the majority of low-income families and individuals come out ahead and are protected against rising prices.
So in your conversations that focus around these concerns, you might consider first asking for clarification about their concerns. We saw in the chat, there were all these different things that it might mean. And so once you do that question, you might discover information that allows you to focus on those specific concerns. For example, like the health benefits of the policy, rather than just the financial benefits for low-income households. Since for some audiences, the concern is more about health effects of the pollution than the financial effects. It can be helpful to understand that unlike cap and trade programs that include offsets, there's no reason to expect hotspots, pollution hotspots to increase under a carbon fee. A focus on health might sound something like this.
Thank you. I'm also concerned that some communities might be left behind. Could you tell me more about your specific concern there, Tony?
Sure. Well, I'm worried that this kind of solution won't clean up the toxic air pollution in low-income communities.
That's a totally valid concern. Low-income communities do suffer the worst of climate change and environmental pollution. Through the strong incentives in the policy to clean up the energy grid and its pollutants, the Energy Innovation Act is actually projected to prevent the premature deaths of 90,000 Americans each year from cleaner air and create a stable climate for everyone to enjoy. And because low-income communities suffer the worst from pollution, many will stand to benefit directly from the health co-benefits of this policy. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So then once you've validated them and pointed out some of the health benefits, you might offer to speak about the financial effects, which might sound something like this.
I'm also happy to share more information about how the dividend part of the policy can help people financially, if you would like to hear that.
And remember, please keep in mind that while a policy like the Energy Innovation Act should not exacerbate environmental injustice, it will not eliminate it. As with climate change, there's no silver bullet to end environmental injustice. We're going to need a lot of different policies.
So Tony, do you want to walk us through sort of the takeaways from that conversation we just had?
Yeah, I mean, again, the main thing here is that the good response started with an acknowledgement, sharing of the staffer's concern and asking a question. And then the better response offers more content, but asks permission to proceed before going into it. So I think that's, anytime you can just say like, that's a concern I share, or that's a valid concern, would you like to hear more? Those are some of the key takeaways here.
Great. So now we're going to talk about another common objection, and that is specifically working across the aisle or working with the other side. So it sort of goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. Our country is quite polarized these days, and trust across parties is really, really low. So therefore, you might likely interact with people who express some concern around working with the other side. So for Democrats, it can feel like Republicans have been unwilling to really engage on climate change solutions. If you're a Democrat, you can probably relate to that quite easily. For Republicans, it can feel like Democrats want to use climate change as a wedge issue to bash Republicans with, or use it to advance their overall big government agenda. And so here's what you might want to say that may be alienating for people on either side.
Well, we're never going to get anything done on climate if we don't start working with the other side.
So in our conversations with either side, we want to be careful not to push too hard. Instead, we want to do our best to meet individuals where they are and understand that not everyone is up for reaching across the aisle. In your conversations with both Republicans and Democrats, that might sound something like this.
Well, our country is very polarized right now, so it's understandable that trust across party lines is difficult.
So once you've made it clear that you're willing to meet them where they're at and they seem open to your perspective, you might add something that makes your perspective more clear. So in your conversations with Democrats, that might sound something like this.
Well, we at CCL think bipartisan support is necessary for durable and effective climate solutions. A single party solution is likely to be fragile and undone when there is a shift in power. We see a need to bring Republicans on board to support climate solutions, and we see the best way to do that is by building relationships based on respect.
So in our conversations with Republicans, it might sound a little bit something like this.
Well, it's important that Republican views and voices are at the table when climate solutions are being discussed. We can connect you with Democrats who are willing to work with you on finding common ground and reasonable solutions.
So I'm just curious, before we move on, how many of you have had a conversation or been a part of a conversation where there's been an expressed concern about working with the other side? So you could raise your real hand, you could raise your virtual hand, you could let us know in the chat. So I see one of you on screen, a couple of you have experienced that in your conversations. Awesome. Luke, thank you. Delara, awesome. Wonderful. Danielle. Okay, great. So a handful of you. Nice. So I'm going to ask you to put your response in the chat to this, a little bit more interactive to keep you guys on your toes this evening. So let's circle back to the process that we outlined in the beginning. And which of the 5 steps did we include and which didn't get included? So here are those 5 steps again. Assume positive intent, ask questions, listen, find common ground, and ask for permission to proceed. So in the conversation that we just had, which of the 5 steps did you notice were present in the, let's say in the better, what are we asking, Tony? Are we asking about the better? No,
yeah, we're asking in the better,
in the better conversation. Which of the 5 steps did you notice were there? Were they all there? Okay, find common ground. Yep. And if you are able to add anything specific, great. Otherwise, if you just want to name the step, 1 and 4. So assume positive intent and find common ground. Assume and find common ground. Excellent. The last step, permission, was present in the part where the conversation with a Republican and offering to speak to Democrats that would be willing to work with them. Nice. Yeah, great. Assume positive intent. No questions were asked. Great. Yeah, so what else? What did you not see there? So no questions were asked. Excellent. Is there anything anything else that was not there in that better aspect? And that's a great reminder that we have these 5 steps that we're proposing, but it doesn't mean that every single aspect has to be in every single better conversation, right? The more that you can put in there, the better, but at the same time, you don't want to pack your responses with all of these things. I mean, the assumption necessarily, it might come through the words that you say. It might also just be in tone and body language, right? Because people pick up on that. Again, I'll come back to brain science. We are wired to pick up on what people think about us. So really the important thing to take away from this demonstration isn't so much the content, but the process. And when first presented with an objection or concern, our natural inclination is to come back with a fact. So we sort of have to retrain our brains to remember what, I don't know if any of you guys have heard of Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, amazing climate scientist. But she and others have taught us that we need to connect on shared values before someone is really ready to accept what we have to say. So in order to determine what the underlying value is behind their statement, we just want to ask questions to draw out more information. Most people don't know the answer to what value do you hold, right? You're like, if somebody asks you like, what value do you hold in what you just said? Like, that's a very hard question for us to answer. So we sort of need to sleuth it out or just ask other questions that help us really be clear on what the person's concern is, right? So we can also establish common ground by sharing their concern and connecting ourselves to that value, whether it's a specific value that gets spoken, like it's really important to me that justice is present, right? Some people are able to name the value in the questions that you ask them. And we also ask permission to proceed, so they're ready to hear what we have to say. So I just want to bring to the forefront a really valuable resource that was created last year. It's called Handling Challenging Questions. And we've highlighted 3, 4, I can't remember how many situations, scenarios, questions we've laid out for you. But there is a Handling Challenging Questions training, but there's also a resource, and it's got these drop-down menus. You can go learn all about What is the agriculture exemption? What is the, what if I'm talking to somebody who's really concerned that the price doesn't go up enough? What about concern about we should be working more with social justice, or we should be working less with Republican, whatever it is, right? So really great resource. The fastest way to find it is to click on the link that Tony added. You can save it in your chat. The second fastest way to find it is to go to community, which is community.citizensclimate.org, and just search in the search bar, handling challenging questions. It'll come right up at the top. So definitely recommend that. We're going to review some advanced skills that will gracefully get you out of bad situations. I'm sure many of us will recognize some of these situations that I'm going to share, but keep in mind, these situations can happen to anyone, so don't blame yourself or your group, but keep in mind that working with people is inherently challenging. If you agree with that statement, let me know in the chat or raise your hand. Working with people is hard, right? We are complicated creatures. And remember also, there's only so much you can get out of some meetings. So we do our best, right? And also worry about what you can control, not about what you can't. Okay. So Tony is going to start us off here.
Yeah, so we're going to briefly address some suggested ways you can respond to 5 different situations, including overcoming climate skepticism, what happens if you have an angry citizen lobbyist, one of your other volunteers, what happens if someone says something that's incorrect or needs clarification, what if someone's going off topic, or what if you get pushback from someone that you think should be an ally in this climate effort. So let's start with climate skepticism or denial. There's a huge misperception that when lobbying, we face climate denial in congressional offices all the time, and nothing could really be further from the truth. We do understand that the potential for dealing with a denier in Congress creates a lot of anxiety for us. So we'll demonstrate a bad and a better way to manage the situation while keeping in mind that this is an extremely rare situation in Congress. So Tamara, do you want to give us, you want to be the member of Congress here?
Yes, would love that. All right, here's a less than optimal response. You know, Tony, the satellite data shows that the planet hasn't warmed in 15 years. So why should we do anything about this?
Well, 97% of peer-reviewed science papers say that it is warming. So you're ignoring the consensus of science. So in this case, we've just taken the bait and jumped into an argument and told them that they're wrong. And so a better response might be something like this. So I understand there's a place for uncertainty in the scientific process. We've got satellite measurements, surface measurements, ocean measurements, and sometimes they might provide varying information. If your office would find it useful, we'd love to set up a separate time to discuss the science of climate change and help get a trusted climate scientist from one of our local universities to be there. Is that something your office would be interested in the future?
So once you've talked about setting up such a meeting, then you can pivot back to discussing solutions, right? So we're not ignoring them. We're giving pause to the concern at hand, addressing it briefly, and then pivoting to what we are actually wanting to talk about. So again, note that the better response started by acknowledging versus telling and was helpful versus confrontational. It leaves the door wider open for breakthroughs than just saying, no, you're wrong. Short-term rhetorical victories may feel good right in here, right? Like, yes, I got him, I told you so, but they are more likely to harden other people's beliefs than really change them. That's generally not how change happens. Think about it when your mom or your parent or your grandparent or your whomever tells you that you're doing something wrong and that you should change. Is that inspiring? No. I don't even have to ask you to share in the chat. It's not. I just know for most of us, it's not inspiring, right? So we really want to help the skeptics and those people who are in denial about the reality of climate change to find a way forward on their own terms, not forcing our terms on them. If they ended up supporting our policy based solely on the economic benefits, would you really care? No, it doesn't matter why they say. We just want them to support it, right? Optimally. So it can also, this is a really important point that I really want to get at. And this is the 4th bullet here. It can be hard for many of us to validate someone else on this topic because it might seem like our validation is telling them that we agree or that they're right. However, validation can happen in many different forms, including just letting someone know that they've been heard, right? Like think about how good it feels when somebody says, I hear you. When I say I hear you, does that mean I agree? No. Does that mean I'm saying you're right? No. But when my husband says to me, I hear what you're saying, it still makes me feel better than if he says nothing or if he disagrees with me, right? So that is what we're going for. All right, Tony, your turn.
Okay, this time I get to play the Angry CCL Volunteer. So infrequently, you may be faced with a difficult meeting situation that's more about personality than substance. So here are some tips for handling these difficult situations, starting with a heated CCL volunteer. So as the angry volunteer, I might say, it's you guys in Texas with your oil companies who are stalling and making this worse.
So you, or perhaps even better, your team leader in your meeting can handle it by saying, Tony, I definitely appreciate your concern and the point you're wanting to make here, but let's actually turn it back to what Greg, the staffer, was just saying, if we could. Moving on to our next challenging situation around human dynamics, when someone says something that's incorrect or needs clarification. All right, here's an interactive question for you. What is your inclination when someone says something that you know is wrong? For example, let's say I say, fee and dividend is a solution that is clearly going to make poor people worse off and the rich richer. What do you want to do? Right? We could even make it more simple. What if I say, I don't think you care about climate change at all? That's why I'm telling you this. And I know that you're on this call. So what do you want to do to me? What do you want to do to me? What do you want to say to me? How do you want to respond? Correct you. That's wrong. Incorrect. Refute the claim. Shake my head, right? Like, yeah, even like, no, I do care about climate. I do, I swear. Correct. Give facts. Exactly. Right. So what we really want to do is, let's take this situation, I should say, into the offices where we're lobbying, and one of our fellow volunteers says, oh yeah, well, with a border adjustment, every product that comes across the border will have an adjustment, right? They're just saying what they think is right. And here we are, we're looking at them, we're like, huh, well, that's not true. Like, what the hell? That's not true. So, Tony, what do you think we could do?
So I want to figure out a way to gently transition to the more accurate information. So I might say something like, I'd like to build on that statement just a bit. My understanding is that while in theory, all products could have an adjustment, to keep things simpler, only emissions intensive products like steel, cement, and fertilizer are likely to have a border adjustment, but that will be determined by the Department of the Treasury. So this is a difficult skill to learn, as you don't want to seem like you're correcting the first person. Most of us struggle with being called out publicly. It's not really comfortable when that happens. So instead, you want to feel like you're adding onto it. Handle the situation by giving more detail and building off of the first person's statement, if that's at all possible.
Great, thanks, Tony. So, new topic. We've all come across great talkers in our lives. I'm sure that many of you have someone in your life who tends to be a talker. And for this reason, it can be helpful to remember that in your meetings, there is a role called the time monitor. And the time monitor is actually tasked with keeping an eye out for how much time CCL members are spending talking relative to how much the office is talking. So the time monitor can really help in this situation, because we really want to make sure that CCL spends no more than 50% of the time talking, and we encourage the staffer or the member of Congress to talk 50% or more. It's also going to be really key for your group to remind each other ahead of time, or I should say not remind each other, but to discuss, like, what are we going to do if the meeting isn't going as planned, or if somebody is going over time. And so discussing that in your planning meeting can really, really help. But if someone does go on and on in your meeting, a good way to handle this is to wait until there's a breaking point, like a pause, right? Wait until there's a pause. Maybe somebody's breathing in and they're just about to, right? And then apologize for interrupting. I'm really sorry to interrupt. Acknowledge their position, right? And then pivot back to why we are there. So where and when might be best to simply interrupt. You just want to use your experience. It can be hard, especially on Zoom. You don't want to cut someone off in mid-sentence, especially if they're just going off topic and they're not being, severely disruptive. But you really want to take your opportunities where you can get them. It's sort of, you just want to feel the situation out. At an in-person meeting, you can use body language to interject. You can raise your hand. You can also lean in. Like, what happens if I do this, right? You all notice me a little bit more, especially probably because I'm on speaker view. But if you're all on gallery view and somebody leans in, then you notice them, right? So you can lean in if you're wanting to speak. You can sort of, lean in and raise your hand. You could unmute to signal that you'd like to speak. Sometimes that's enough for some people to see that you want to say something. So then there's another situation. We might get some pushback from some like-minded folks. So my situation, as I've been in meetings with people who tend to be more on the progressive side, I live in Oregon, so we have lots of progressive meetings around here. And there are some people who agree with us or with me on climate and who understand that we need to act, but they might favor another policy, or they might have reservations about the Energy Innovation Act. So how should we handle this situation? We want to remember to show appreciation for their important work on this issue and the worthiness of their plan or ideas. That might sound familiar, right? Validate them, acknowledge them, let them know that you appreciate what they have been doing. We really also want to acknowledge the passion that people feel for their chosen approach. Like, they have a reason for having that approach, for liking that approach, just as much reason as you have for liking the approach that you like, right? So as climate advocates, we all share a common goal of transitioning to a decarbonized economy. So it's really, really easy to get upset with people who are already concerned about climate change, who don't agree on our exact approach. And the slight differences should really never let us forget that we're working towards the same goals. So we want to avoid negativity. We want to avoid bashing their plan, because remember, they're proud of their ideas. We want to tell them that we appreciate their idea and their work to this important issue, and really acknowledge that in order to get what we are trying to get done, we as CCLers need to keep all of our focus on our area of advocacy too, right? So you could frame it with a concept that that Dr. Danny Richter likes to share about thinking of the environmental movement as a large ecosystem. So in any ecosystem, the diversity of life forms its strength. In other words, having more species that makes them better at resisting extinction, helps us avoid extinction, really. So having more than one approach lends to a diversity of solutions and is a way that gives us all strength. I like to think of it as a wheel, right? Like, we are one spoke of the wheel, and 350 has another approach, and they're a spoke of the wheel, and all sorts of efforts have their spoke, and having all the spokes in, having them all trued, makes the wheel stronger. So Tony, you want to do some summarizing for us?
Yeah, so I just want to bring us back to that 5-step process that we outlined at the beginning, and that we've hopefully demonstrated in a few different ways here. So we want to assume positive intent. We want to make sure to listen, and then listen and listen some more. It's always about listening for the values that are underlying what they're saying. We want to connect on those values and build common ground and reflect those shared values back to the person who's speaking. And then if possible, we can ask for permission to proceed before sharing what we want to share, what's important to us.
Excellent. So if any of you are paying attention, you probably noticed that what was on the screen is a little bit different than what Tony was saying. So good job for noticing that. I noticed it for sure. And really, thank you for coming this evening. There are forums. If you want to ask any questions, you should be able to get a response within 24 hours from a staff member or volunteer. And we've added our email addresses on the screen if you want to contact Tony or myself directly. And have a wonderful night. Thank you, everybody.
See you at the
Have fun in
conference.
your lobby meetings. Thank you, Tony, for your help.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.